All right, this is Max Legault with Shallow Graves Magazine. Here with some special guests. Take a look.
It's us. We're here.
Conjuring, Sandra Johnson, maybe you've heard of them. They were just telling us some wonderful stories. So I hear you've known each other for just a little while.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
How long might that be? You don't have to admit to the...
No, we'll admit it.
You can say how young
45
you were.
years.
4 or 5 years?
We
Oh, so-
survived to
Oh,
get
that's
this
amazing.
old.
You lasted that long.
This is my paranormal brother. He showed up at our farmhouse when he was 18 years old and already a seasoned paranormal investigator.
Whoa.
We don't know how he knew to come. He said my mother called him. She said I never called anyone, but she liked him so much that she invited him into the house. And I'm telling you, look at him now, and then imagine him with long, flowing, beautiful blonde hair. He pulls up in the yard with his group Pyro, which is short for...
Parapsychological Investigation and Research Organization.
Awesome.
They pull into the yard at the farmhouse. It's August of 1973. We've already lived there for 3 years, almost. And he said, well, he pulled in, he got out of the car, and he's holding a Bible, which was real smart for him to bring that to the farm. And my sister Nancy, who was in love with anything male, automatically, if it was male, it was love. She's gonna, if she ever sees this, she'll so kill me. But anyway, she goes running into the house, and he's wearing a tunic and the long hair, and she's like, "Mom, Jesus Christ is here!" He looked the part like
Probably
you
didn't
can't
have the
believe.
beard, though.
No, I had the sideburns,
Yeah,
though.
the
there you
sideburns,
go.
yes. Yeah. And so they were actually the first ones to investigate the house, and to this day we don't understand
Wait, so they
how
were
that
investigating
happened.
your house?
Yes,
That's-
yep, the farmhouse, and we don't understand how it happened, but we both know that it was supposed to. And then after his experience, several
Oh, yes,
that day, he went and got Ed and Lorraine Warren and brought them to our house. We didn't know who they were when they showed up at the door, but he did. And he went and informed them that there was a family in Harrisville, Rhode Island that had a predicament. And they came on night before Halloween, 1973, because they thought that would be when the veil was thinnest and they had a best chance of having a manifestation. And they later understood that you could come to our house any time of day or night, any day of the week, any time of year, and boom.
Like, don't worry about the time, just show
Yes,
up.
exactly. At least
You'll
in terms
see.
of the farmhouse, there was no veil. Yep, no veil at all.
The house
So,
itself was a portal.
Yep, cleverly disguised as a farmhouse.
Yes.
do you still have this house?
No, we sold it in 1980, and our whole family moved south. I went back to Rhode Island years later, but the thing that's most interesting about this is that I consider Keith a very holy person. He's very devout, and he was threatening to the house. There was some entity in the house that did not want him there, and I want you to tell the story about the bedroom.
Oh, right. Well,
Oh, we might be going into some X-rated material again.
No, actually, it's Jay.
her sisters took me by the hand and took me up, showed me where they were most frightened. It was a bedroom where two of them shared, and they had had some very, very frightening experiences in
Nancy
that
and
bedroom.
April. Yep.
Yes, Nancy and April had some frightening experiences there, and I felt so bad for them because they were so frightened. They were such beautiful young children, and even though I was a teenager, I was the closest thing to an adult. So I asked them, do you have any religious beliefs? And they said, oh yes, we're Catholic. And I said, well, try calling upon the name of Jesus. And as soon as I said that name, yes, suddenly there was, it's hard to describe. Her sister has described it as the bubble. It's like you're contained, time seems to stop. It's like an electrical charge. The atmosphere just changed. Within that second, there was a window to my right that could not possibly be closed because of the humidity, the atmosphere. It suddenly slammed so hard it practically shook the room. Her sister was slapped on the left side of the head, went screaming away, and just all pandemonium in just a few seconds. But it seemed like time had slowed down. So So I said the name of Jesus twice more, told them not to be afraid. It left the room. Not the house, but whatever was there left the room. And we all shared a group hug, and then we hightailed it downstairs. I did put some symbols.
Yes,
now, I didn't
you
have
did.
any holy water or blessed oil with me at the time.
But
so
we had sidewalk chalk.
sidewalk chalk.
Hey, when the
We
pinch
were kids, we had sidewalk chalk.
In the sign of the cross over the door and the windows. And then we went downstairs, didn't come back for the rest of the night until they had to go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very intense environment to grow up in, but it was also equally enlightening because when we were in crisis in that house, all that was required to make it stop was invoking the name of God and saying it with heartfelt desire. God help me, be with me. And it stopped. Whatever it was, it stopped. And, you know, one of the things that The Conjuring did was leave people with the impression that the Warrens were, you know, holy and devout Roman Catholics, which they were.
Right.
But it tried to juxtapose them to the Perron pagan heathens as though we had no spirituality. And anybody that really works in the paranormal and does, you know, conducts investigations knows that it's very spiritual people that are targeted. And what happened when we moved into that house was that there was a female entity there who was threatened by my mother. She wanted us, the 5 children, she coveted us, and she lusted after my father, and she wanted my mother gone. And when she couldn't get my mother to leave of her own avail, she started to oppress her from within. And remember, my mom went through that period of time where she started using archaic language and dressing in dark vintage clothing. And we're like, you know, we thought at first, because she was doing so much historical research on the house, that maybe she was just a little overexposed to that. But we didn't realize that she was slipping away from us.
She started melding into another person altogether, an older person, very, very archaic, was almost losing her identity. And that's a very, very dangerous place to be at.
Her voice even changed. It didn't even sound like her. And I heard years and years later, I heard a tape that they really couldn't get a lot of photographs or anything from the house. Whenever the Warrens came to conduct their investigation, which was maybe 4 or 5 times over a year and a half, and we lived there another 7 years after that. The only time they ever got her recorded was one time, and I heard John Zaffis shared it with me a few years ago. And I'm listening to this recording, and I'm like, wait a minute. You know, it says Carolyn Perron on this, and it didn't sound like my mother. And it wasn't until about 45 minutes into her interview with Ed and Lorraine that she actually came back. So the entity that was trying to take over with her was the one that was actually speaking to them for about 45 minutes. But I'll tell you what brought her back. Remember I shared this with you? We did a thing about this together.
Yes.
There was a seance in the house. It was never an exorcism. My mother was not possessed. But she was definitely involved with the spirit that was so powerful. And Ed and Lorraine came and they conducted a seance that went very tragically wrong, and my mother almost lost her life.
Oh, Lord.
And about 3 months later, my father threw them out of the house. He's like, don't get out, don't ever come back, we don't want to know you, get out. And he used some very colorful language. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. But about 3 months later, my mother she was just wasting away. She had become waif-like. I mean, just hollowed out cheeks, and she was really suffering. And she wasn't eating. She just was. We felt like we were losing her, and that was my real fear living in the house, was that my mother was going to die in the house. And I guess it was sometime later, it must have been in the fall, because I was up doing homework late one night, and I had taken over the role as the third parent, because my dad was on the road a lot, and mom was just struggling so much that I came home, I made dinner for the girls, I helped them with their homework, I got them to bed, and she came out of her room about 11 o'clock that night, and she said, I'm hungry. And I was like, well, great, you know, and I had made beef stew that night, so I went into the kitchen, and, I make the best beef stew, oh my God. But I had already closed the house down for the night, and I walked from the parlor through the darkened dining room, through the front foyer, through the kitchen, into the pantry. So I was like a football field away from her. And it took me, there was before a microwave, so I had to heat up the stew, and she wanted coffee at 11 o'clock at night. And so I was gone for a few minutes. In the interim, she reached over into the wood box to throw a log on the fire. And it was so cold up there, we had a fire like 10 months out of the year. And she heard laughter behind her as she was throwing the log on the fireplace. And she turned around, and there was a whole family having dinner in our dining room, sitting at furniture that was all hand-hewn, not our own, a woman cooking at a fireplace that had been sealed for more than 100 years. There were two men sitting at the table. They had pewter steins in front of them, indicative of the 1700s, right? Because
Yes.
it was outlawed in the 1800s because it was killing people
Yes,
with the lead.
content. Yes.
And the two men were sitting there. They were sitting on benches along the side of the table. The woman's cooking. She told her kids to go take their seats. They were having dinner. And one of them turned and looked into the parlor, and he saw my mother. And he nudged the man beside him and pointed her out, and she was the ghost.
She was the ghost to them for a moment.
So they were looking into the future while she was simultaneously looking into the past. And that was her epiphany. That's when the light went on and she came back to us, because finally it made sense. We were living in simultaneous multiple dimensions. And she realized that we were sharing that house with a multitude of people, and that they were perfectly safe, perfectly benign, and they were just having dinner, and there was room enough for everyone. They were just living there in their time. It was a fascinating, incredible way to grow up. And even though there were truly frightening moments, it was as much a love story as it was a horror story. Don't you think? Wouldn't you describe it as that?
Yes. The ending of the movie did get it right. When the whole family's together, holding on to each other, and a loving kumbaya moment. That was actually true. That was the Perron family.
It was our love for each other that helped us survive an ordeal that most people can't really even imagine living that way. We stayed in that house for 10 years for a multitude of reasons, but I think ultimately we stayed in that house because we were supposed to. And then 30 years later, I was supposed to put pen to paper and tell our story to the world when the world was ready to hear it.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And it's not that nothing happened while she was writing the story. She was
I know, there was
contacted.
a period. Yeah, we weren't living there. Someone else had to be.
Well, you know, I thought that
Did
the
they know what they were getting into?
Yeah, yes, they did, actually. They did. She bought that house because of its reputation. But I will tell you that we, when we moved, we thought that would be it, that it would be all over.
Yes.
And I remember when I did your show, and I think we talked about it the first time that I did your show.
Right.
And
it's finally over.
yeah, it was like, that's it. We're moving. We're leaving them all behind. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Very profound attachments were formed that have existed and persisted lifelong, and I knew it when we left the farm and we moved to Georgia. My sister Cindy had gone down early to bring the horses. And she's standing in front of a full-length, in a modern house, in front of a full-length window with a cup of coffee in her hand, had just brewed a cup because she knew we were coming in early in the morning, and had driven all night long, so she had a fresh pot ready. And the spirit that we left behind on the porch 2 days later was standing right behind her.
I guess he missed her. And has she seen him since?
Her.
Pardon me, her.
Yes, we've all seen them since. We've all had...
So no longer just at the original location?
No. They're free to fly.
Wow, interesting. Wow, that's fascinating.
Something that's interesting, in the movie The Conjuring, she's depicted as a young teenager going through teenage angst, and she's flirting with one of the investigators. Back then,
Nancy was Nancy.
Andrea was a
bookworm.
lovely little bookworm with the round glasses, and so sweet. But flirting, no.
No flirt. I didn't even know how until I was in my 20s.
Well, Hollywood.
I know, Holly weird. Yeah. But I will tell you, and I'll give you the scoop for your show. I just got a 3-movie deal on my trilogy of books, and the real story behind The Conjuring is coming to a theater near you in 2018.
Okay, so your trilogy of books, but 1 movie, and this one's going to be
3 movies.
3 movies. Oh my God! It's actually going to be a trilogy of movies.
Yes, it
Wow.
needs to be.
Well,
And even that won't cover it all, huh?
Right. There's just,
But, you know.
I mean, over 10 years of life, you just can't cover it in movies, but this will come close, as
It
close as
will,
we
as
can.
close as
stuff.
it gets, yeah.
And Sandra's listened to this story since before we were married, time after time after
She
time.
knew what she was getting into.
She did.
Oh, yes.
And I've actually been able to visit the house as well.
Oh, great.
And investigate it.
Our group, yeah, New England Anomalies Research actually got to visit the house, and we did actually pick up some spirit voices, so there is definitely something still there, even to this day.
Regardless of what you might hear to the contrary.
Well, thank you so much. This is a fascinating story. So looking forward to seeing the trilogy when it's released.
It will blow your mind.
Thank you so much.
It's so wonderful to hear of the bonds that have been formed between you and everyone who seems to
Oh,
be.
yes, permanent
That
bond.
seems to not be going away anytime soon.
Never, ever. It's permanent. It is ethereal in nature. This was supposed to happen. And the first time I met Sandra, we walked into each other's arms like we were sisters from another mother that had
Absolutely.
reunited. I mean, it's just, and that happens a lot in the paranormal community. I think that we're all doing this good work in tandem. We're kind of a collective. And even though we're very different personalities, I mean, when you think about all the personalities in the paranormal, but we're all in the same boat. We're working with common purpose because we know what we want the rest of the world to know, that there is something beyond our mortal existence, and how you comport yourself in this life matters. And that's the message.
Well, all right. And the message I hope everybody here will take away from it, as well as we can all use that type of friendships in our own lives going
Yes.
forward. Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. This couldn't have gone much better. Yahoo! This is Max Legault, Shallow Grays Magazine, signing off. Thank you so much. We'll see you again tomorrow.